Welcome everybody to your Sioux Falls City Council's information meeting. Today is the 14th of March, Tuesday, and we're glad to have you all here. And those of you that are out on TV land, welcome. I will give the first, according to our agenda, I will give the first report on the audit committee. The audit committee did a number of things. We met yesterday. We introduced Jen Tano, our new internal auditor, and so we're glad to have her in the midst right now, and working hard at learning some of the things that are going on with the audit committee. Next, we reviewed the follow-up fuel control audit report that was done, and that was passed unanimously. External audit of the city's financial statement by I. Bailey is coming along nicely. It's expected to be done very early summer. The CAFR is due in March, sometime the end of this month, and we will then move on to have the full audit done a little bit after that, correct, Director Turbach? And then the next item was the annual audit plan. There were some minor changes made to that, but our new audit manager is moving forward with continued audits of different areas of public government. And then lastly, we addressed and approved some continuing education and training for our audit staff for the upcoming year. Are there any questions of me about the audit committee? Or Mr. Kiley, who had to chair it?
I don't have anything else to add.
Okay.
Good summary.
Hearing none, we'll move on to the fiscal committee.
Absolutely.
Michelle.
Yes. Thank you, Councilor Rolfing.
Or Councilor Erpenbach, I'm sorry.
Fiscal committee, as you know, has been meeting the last couple of months in kind of a working session, a little less formal, trying to just dig into some sort of nuts and bolts on that youth prevention services line item in the budget. And so Councilors Rolfing and Starr and Erickson and I have been working through that with the much needed and much appreciated help of our budget analyst, Dave Bixler. He's really kind of led the charge for us. And so we just continued that conversation. We have been meeting with Prairie View Prevention, who is the current holder of that contract. That is not a contract between the city and Prairie View Prevention. It's a contract between, see if I can get this right, it's the city and the school district. The school district then sort of has an agreement with Prairie View Prevention, and we're just trying to iron all that out. And so we will come back in, fiscal committee will come back into a more formal setting this next in April for its April meeting, and as we move forward. But I'm not sure that I can yet say what our recommendations are going to be in terms of based on that conversation that we're in the midst of. I do know that the one thing that came out of that meeting the other day was that Councilors Erickson and Starr and Mr. Bixler will meet with the school board and kind of talk through maybe what is it that the elected officials' expectations are, and what are those things that we might make happen differently. And yeah, I get the hand motions, Councilor Erickson, but Councilor Rolfing won't be here, and so I put Councilor Starr on board for that. So sorry, I should have said that earlier to you off camera. I apologize, but it's one of those things we all kind of have to kind of figure out where we're going with that. And we do have a contract with that works through the end of June only, and so we'll just kind of go from there. So
Super.
Thanks
Questions?
for hanging in there. It's a great conversation, but it's taking us a long time. So I appreciate the patience and the willingness, especially of our staff, to work through this with us. So thanks. Yeah, questions if anybody has them.
Any questions for Councilor Erpenbach? Hearing none, we'll move on.
Thanks.
I get to give you a fairly long urban UDC meeting, Urbanized Development Commission. First piece of business that I want to inform you of is that many of you may know, but for those of us who have been on that committee, we know that Steve Metley was the chair of that committee for many, many years, and with his passing, we've had to look at somebody to take his place. And with some, we looked at some names that were brought to us, and it was agreed that we would ask Carol Tweet, former city councilor and or county commissioner, to take over that role, and she has agreed. So I'm happy to announce that Carol Tweet will be our UDC chairman beginning next month. So that's really good news. Going to be hard shoes to fill, but I'm sure Carol, knowing her, will do a lot. The UDC meeting, I'm just going to go through these one at a time so you get an idea of what's going on. I think last month I reported that we were revising our bylaws to include Harrisburg as a Class A city now. They've reached $5,000. They did their own census and found out that they are over $5,000, so they deserve, if you will, they're not required, but they are, they kind of requested to have a seat at, a full seat at this board and with CCOG, and so we arranged that with the, with our bylaws. So they will have a full seat at that, at the table. Secondly, or next, urban planning work program and public participation plan. This is a schedule of how, for instance, the intersection at 26th Street and 229 and 26th and Southeastern, how the South Dakota Public Transportation Department and CCOG go about getting public input and the steps they take, boom, 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 all the way down there are 7 or 8 steps before outcome is taken from the standpoint of what is the public participation goal, who are the stakeholders, the method of doing it, implementations, evaluations, et cetera. So there is a very strictly worded, if you will, and set progression that they go through to make sure that we have public input, that we get some, we get the thing right when we do it, we make the right decision, and that we go through that. And there were minor changes to that, so we approved that procedure. Next, we went to projects for the 5310 program, Federal 5310, Federal Transportation Association. And basically, we awarded to Lifescape and River City Transit some monies that were Fed funds that can be used. Most of it was capital, $115,000 was capital, and $94,000 was for operating. Lifescape is buying a new van to use with the people that they service to get them to and from work and to other appointments they might have. The River City or CCTS, I can't remember what that stands for exactly. If one of you can help me, that'd be great. But they are also buying a vehicle and then also and keeping $94,000 for, not keeping, but using $94,000 for operation to keep them going with the tests that we have going. That is working very, very well to help individuals with paratransit. The work routes, if you will, for both Lifescape and Dakota Buildies. So that's, and then we did carry forward another $22,000 for from 2016 to 2017 that will be available. Next on the list was the Transportation Improvement Program. This is probably of most interest to people. These are things that should happen sometime in the next, well, they're moved around a little bit to different years and things. For instance, median lighting from Interstate 229 from Louise to I-90 all the way around. That's going to be moved to 2020. Bridges, there's some bridge work, not rehab, but just some repair work that needs to be done on some. Not real significant, but it's moved from 17 year to 19. Another one is shoulder work improvements on Highway 38 and South Dakota 15, which is Minnesota Avenue South, doing some shoulder repairs, and those are going to be done in 2017. Those have been moved up, and so that gives you a little idea. And then also there's going to be some paths, shared youth path construction on the road, so there would be a bicycle path basically on South Main Avenue in T and West Avenue in Crooks. So just to give you a little idea of some of the stuff that goes on there and what was approved and what was not. The MPO, this did some things. It took, just to give you an idea of what happened in 2016, there was $141 million spent in the Sioux Falls area. And of that, we matched 256,000. The rest of it was Fed funds. So we're making some progress on some of the things that we have. Wish we had some more Fed funds, but then that's the way it goes. And if that starts drying up, it gives you guys an idea of what might happen, because there's some of those things just need to be done, like 12th Street Bridge and things like that, that we get funds to help us with on those kind of things. Number 8 on the agenda is just some money that was moved around within the UPWP, which is the Uniform Planning Work Program. And basically it increased some funds for the planning process and decreased some for Minnehaha County Highway Department. And that is the report that I have. I know it gets a little long on that kind of that deal with UDC, but we go through a lot out there, and it's important for you guys to know a little bit about what's going on and where some of the money is being spent. Okay. Any questions of me for UDC? If I make it long enough, nobody ever has any questions. So, okay. Thank you. I succeeded. Open discussion. City Council open discussion. Anything?
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, if I could,
Councilor
please.
Starr.
Thank you. 4 of us, the newly elected councilors from a year ago, had the opportunity to meet last week with the Chamber of Commerce's Issues Management Committee, a very astute group of people who are interested in government, both on the state, local, and school level. And one of the questions they asked us that was really quite interesting, and I have reflected on it a lot since we met, is that they asked us, what are we doing as a city over the course of the next year? And it really brought to mind for me, because it seems like my weeks go fast. We get agendas on Thursday, we start digging in, and we do meeting by meeting. And it really reminded me that we are the policymakers for the city of Sioux Falls, and it's our job to continue to look forward. I've told people over the years that, or as part of campaigning and being on the commission, that it's kind of our job to dream, to see where the city's going to be. The things that we do today affect our community not only next week and next month, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now. The success and the excitement that we have in Sioux Falls as a city came because of the leadership from 10 and 20 years ago. So I just, as part of open discussion today, I wanted to challenge us to do more than just look at today's agenda, but to look forward and what we can do as leaders for our community to provide those policies that make Sioux Falls a great place to live 20 years from now. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a few comments about the upcoming annexation task force that was originally scheduled to begin on March 28th, but we have pushed that back to the first meeting will actually take place Tuesday, April 11th at 2 o'clock in the main library, meeting room B. And the conflict was with the State of the City address, so we have moved it back. But I'm going to invite Director Cooper up here in just a moment, but earlier today I'd shared with you an email that I'd sent to a concerned citizen, and I've been sharing some other information to you over the past few weeks here too regarding the task force, and I want to make it a more public statement here so that we're sure that citizens are aware of what's going on. So I'm just going to read, to keep it brief, I'll just read a part of what I wrote to the citizen this morning. Due to the complexity of the subject and the fact that annexations often differ greatly as a result of varying circumstances, I'm certain we will face, the task force, challenges as we look for solutions to this topic. I am hopeful the soon-to-be-convened annexation task force will determine a way to move forward now and into the future. The purpose of the task force is to establish criteria that will be used in the future to move forward with annexations. It should be a process that not only assists the city in the planning and the coordination of services, but is important we identify a process that is agreeable and beneficial to all citizens, including the citizens affected by annexation. As I stated above, no doubt we'll face challenges ahead, but rest assured, we will take as much time as needed to ensure we produce an effective and fair process. So having said that, I'd like to ask Director Cooper to come forward and maybe add some details to what's going to be taking place. Again, that's Tuesday, April 11th will be the first meeting, 2 o'clock in the main library meeting room B. Thank you, Director Cooper.
Yeah, thank you, council members, for inviting me to come up. Just very briefly, we have put together this task force, and I think it's a great concept. We've used that before for other special topics that really end up setting policy. Urban agriculture, billboards, those kind of things that we've used this process before. And I think it works very well. As we're rolling this out, we're going to include 3 members of the city council, Councilors Kiley, Neitzert, and Selberg to start out with. We've invited to start out, again, 4 citizens. And those have come forward to us by working with them in the past. We have a representative of the Cactus Heights neighborhood, which is in the northeast part of the city. We've been working with them on a pre-annexation agreement in the past. They have a rural section road, they have rural services, and they've talked to us in the past about potential annexation. We have a representative of the southeast area along Sycamore that we've started with a city-initiated annexation. We have a representative of the southwest part of the city along Louise that we started out with a city-initiated annexation, and it ended up as a petitioned annexation, so went through the entire process from beginning to end. And then we have a representative of the Prairie Meadows development, which is on the west side of Sioux Falls, that we've been working on for many, many months. So we're trying to at least begin with a variety of citizen representatives in a variety of situations, because these annexations are all kind of unique. They're going to be the same situation in all cases, but as Councilor Kiley said, we want to begin with the end in mind, which is coming up with some criteria that we can use to really put together an annexation program. And we've identified 10 different subjects that would be discussed at each of these initial meetings. As you said, we've scheduled 4 so far, and we'll see how far we get down the list to get to the end. These are going to be public meetings. They'll be open to the public. They'll be open for citizen input. And so as the task force starts out, we'll have discussions about how they want to conduct the meetings, the process that they want to use for soliciting public input or reaching out to other folks. A number of city staff will be a resource to the task force, including planning, project management, engineering, attorneys, and finance. We're going to publicize these as much as we can through the website, through press releases. So again, we want to make it as transparent as possible of when these meetings are going to be held and the different discussions that will be conducted at each of those meetings. So I'm looking forward to getting it started, and I'm really looking forward to what the end result is going to be later this year. So thanks to the council for allowing us to move forward with this process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cooper.
I think this is a very important task force, and I applaud you for putting together. This will set some policy for many, many years into the future, and so it's good that we have as much public input as possible on policy and where we go from there, so we have buy-in. Appreciate it very much. Okay, let's move into our presentations, and we first have Shannon Verhey. Shannon, on sidewalk ordinance. We need the big sheet for this?
No.
No? Oh, that's insulation.
Good afternoon. Shannon Burhay from the Engineering Division of Public Works. And I'm here today to give you an overview of our changes that we're proposing, or our proposed changes that we want to make to our engineering design standards, as well as our sidewalk ordinance, Chapter 96. And today, Lance Weatherly, our principal drainage engineer, is going to be presenting a few slides on the drainage-related engineering design standards. And then I also have Wes Phillips, our principal street engineer, and Colleen Moran from our attorney's office to maybe help answer any questions that may come up about the sidewalk design standard changes or the sidewalk ordinance. And a little bit of background, again, the presentation I'm going to show here today has actually been shown to Land Use Committee a couple of times, and we vetted through some questions and concerns that were out there. And at the request of the Land Use Committee, they wanted city staff to bring it forth to the full council at Informational, just to kind of make sure everybody has a good overview of what we're going to do. So from a timeline perspective, so tonight's going to be the first reading of the changes to Chapter 96, and then next week we will do the second reading to the ordinance for Chapter 96, and obviously the ordinance has to be 2 readings on that, and then also next week we'll do the resolution for the engineering design standards, and then if with council approval, they would all be effective on April 14th, both the design standards and the ordinance. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lance Weatherly to talk about Chapter 11 and 12 engineering design standard changes.
Welcome, Lance.
Good afternoon, Council. Here to talk about, as Shannon alluded to, Chapter 11 and Chapter 12 engineering design standards. They are related to drainage-related matters. One thing also want to note is these items were presented to IRAB as well and received a vote of support. The first slide above is essentially a cleanup item where we had a reference to 2 locations. Throughout the year, we look at these documents and look for items that we can identify to either clarify or make them simpler for developers or consulting engineers to use. So this here is essentially a cleanup item that is just changing a reference to one single location than what it was before. Just a little bit of background. The image is of a structure on a BMP, so that is a structure that essentially slows the water leaving and is what allows stormwater be treated before it is released downstream. The next slide is regarding allowable shear stress, and the image in the background is of Sertoma Avenue near Strabane. Following the August 2015 rain event, had some erosion there. One thing we did identify in our design standards is we had allowable shear stress for channels, but what we call immediately downstream of a pipe is end protection. So what we are proposing here is a standard that is used throughout to insert that in our engineering documents to strengthen our design standards and to prevent this and to give designers a tool for designing this riprap so it doesn't wash away in the future. The last thing is in Chapter 11, and it is related to outlet protection again. This proposed change is essentially regarding a minimum size of a riprap. Class A is what was before, and we are proposing the language to say that Class A or riprap or smaller shall only be allowed if accepted by the city engineer's office. This is related to, in our inspections of developments and things throughout the city, we've noticed in locations where this size of rock has been installed, we've had to come back and do maintenance quicker than we've would like to see, and we'd like to strengthen that a little bit to a little larger size of rock for the minimum standard. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Shannon. Stick around, be happy to answer any questions at the conclusion of this presentation.
So a little background on the accessible sidewalk changes that we want to make. As far as a governing federal law, we're required to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And basically, the city of Sioux Falls, we have jurisdictional responsibility for any infrastructure installed in our public right-of-way. So that's why we have to manage the sidewalk requirements, and the sidewalks generally are installed in our public right-of-way. So we're managing those requirements. An acronym that you might hear me throw out through the presentation here is PROAG, and that stands for Public Rights-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. And that's the current best practice that's out there, and that was developed by the United States Access Board. That's a federal agency, and it's actually about a 120-page document of all the different technical requirements to make sure we're complying with cross slopes, just making sure that anybody with a disability has equal access. And essentially what we've done is we've tried to consolidate this 120-page document into about 22, 23 pages of hopefully more easy to understand requirements. As far as background, like Lance said with his design standard changes, we also took all these changes for the accessible sidewalks, whether the design standard changes or the ordinance changes, and those were approved by IRAB. And then we also presented at the January and February Land Use Committee meetings. And again, after the first meeting, there were some questions that came up. So we met with the Home Builders Association, maybe worked through a couple questions they had. We came back to the February Land Use Committee and presented again. And again, moving forward to full council informational here. And then I do want to point out the Home Builders Association, they've been very cooperative. We've got they have no objection to us moving forward with these changes. So again, we've done, I'll actually talk about some information or some training that we're going to be doing with the HBA and some educational stuff with them a little later in my presentation. And then another thing, this is new. Within the last couple weeks, we actually went to the ADA Accessibility Board, just the board that kind of vets through some of our projects, and we showed them all the proposed changes, and they were very supportive of the changes that we're recommending that we do. So from a big picture standpoint, what are we doing with our design standard changes? Before the accessible sidewalk, they were just kind of a half a page of requirements that were, I'll say, within our street design guidelines. And again, taking all these PROAG-based requirements, what we've done is we're proposing eliminating the half a page of sidewalk requirements in the street section, and we're creating another chapter in our design standards called Accessible Sidewalk and Protruding Objects. And the vast majority of this, we're just formalizing our current standards and practices. Again, like cross slopes, running slopes, turning areas, that's nothing new. That's stuff we've been doing for 15, 20 years. Curb ramps, detectable warning panels, it's just formalizing that. But there are some changes that are a little different from our past practices, and I want to try and point those out. Again, the overview, we're moving to our dual curb ramp designs. We have to do a little more design work on intersections. And then I'll spend a little bit of time on sidewalk width and residential driveways regarding passing zones, and then some additional design detail that we need on our construction plans. So the first one, this just kind of shows a typical ramp at an intersection. Just real basic, the blue turning space, that's an area where somebody in a wheelchair can come up to it. They can kind of stop, settle themselves before they cross the street. And then you have the curb ramps going in each direction there. You have the little dots on the bottom. Those are detectable warning panels. Those are for the visually impaired individuals. So if they're coming up to a street, they can actually feel that with their cane. Before they cross the street, they know that they're going to be entering a street. So from a dual ramp perspective, typically if you go into a new subdivision, generally we've been installing one single ramp that comes out diagonally on the intersection. ProWag and the best practices now are to install dual curb ramps. So basically, again, somebody in a wheelchair or with some mobile disability, instead of having to come to the corner, turn, go out kind of toward the middle of the street, and then return, reorienting themselves. This way, this allows them to cross the street in a straight manner. So this is something we're going to be transitioning to. You know, it's going to take a few years to fully get this implemented. You know, we have a lot of new developments where maybe the curb and gutter is installed with that single opening already, maybe, and the house isn't built there. Well, we're not going to require a developer or a home builder to go back and rip out the concrete to put in these dual ramps. But as new curb and gutters getting installed, that's when we're going to be putting the dual openings in. So again, that's kind of a multi-year transition. Another thing, we've always done a really good job of getting pedestrians to the corner. Well, one of the requirements in ProAg is we got to make sure that we're accounting for these pedestrians in the street also. There's some cross slope requirements regarding cross slope, and when I mention cross slope, that's kind of like if you're going down the street, your left to right angle, how much it's sloping to your left or the right. And again, depending on if there's stop signs or if it's a traffic signal, there's some maximum limitations that we have to be accounting for when they're crossing the street. Sidewalk width and passing zones. This one actually generated a lot of discussion in the committee and with the Home Builders Association. So one of the requirements that ProAg and the ADA requires is when you have sidewalk that is only 4 foot wide, you have to install a passing zone every 200 feet. So what that, basically the premise behind that is if you have, again, 2 wheelchairs meeting each other, 4 feet width, 4 foot in width is not enough area for them to pass each other. So what the requirements are saying is, hey, every 200 feet, put in this 5 by 5 foot passing zone. And that way, if 2 wheelchairs are meeting, they can pass each other. And I'd like to point out this is generally only an issue on our local residential streets. There, the design standard is 4 foot wide sidewalk. On the majority of our collector streets or our arterial streets, the sidewalks are already 5 and 6 foot wide at least. So that passing zone requirement, we already got it because of our width. So we worked with the Home Builders Association on how do we incorporate this passing zone. One of the proposals was, do we just make all our sidewalk 5 foot wide, even in residential streets? That'd be a simple solution. You know, some of the drawbacks there were essentially that's more hard surfacing, more concrete, less green space in the boulevard. You know, we have to give up something to accommodate for that. There's maybe just a very slight cost increase by doing a 5 foot wide sidewalk on those areas. So the other thing was, hey, do we just make sure we make these 5 foot by 5 foot squares every couple hundred feet? And ultimately the home builders recommended to us that let's make our driveway, our sidewalks through the driveway 5 foot wide. So instead of them having a normal driveway starting at the street, you're going up pretty steep, your approach, and then you flatten out to that 2% cross slope, and typically that would be 4 foot wide on a local street, and then you go back steeper toward your house. So what we're saying is through that driveway, instead of making your flat spot 4 foot wide, you need to make it 5 foot wide. And basically that's a no cost impact because you were pouring concrete there already. So that was the direction that we're heading there. So a couple things, but want to point out applicability. So there was some concerns that are we going to make homeowners that are repairing 1 or 2 panels of sidewalk have to comply with these new requirements? And no, that is not the intent. The intent of our design standards are for new construction and redevelopment. Again, if somebody's going in, say they're taking 2 or 3 houses or knocking them down, putting in a development there or something, yes, then they have to comply with that. But again, this does not apply to the average homeowner doing a few panels of sidewalk. The other thing is, you know, this is new. We're going to do our best to try and educate all the contractors out there. But if they miss this passing zone in the driveway, you know, what are some options there? And there are options there. We're not going to make a contractor remove an entire driveway just to get that 5-foot width in, you know, maybe there they can take out one concrete panel beside the driveway. It still meets the intent of the federal law or the federal requirements. So we work through that, and it's actually something we're going to go through this summer, evaluate it, and maybe we'll come back with some recommended changes that, hey, maybe instead of doing the driveway, maybe the HBA will recommend, hey, let's just do this passing zone instead. But for now, we just want to go through a construction season and see how it works. The other thing is more design detail. Without getting in too much engineering jargon, typically in the past we have designed the street first, and then we kind of fill in the gaps with our accessible sidewalk, our pedestrians. The direction we're moving now and working with the engineers, when you're designing a street, you have to account for your vehicles and your pedestrians at the same time. And you almost have to put thought in your pedestrians first before you lay out the roadway design. Otherwise, you're not going to meet all these slopes. I mean, there's just so many technical criteria with this. And essentially what we did before is, hey, design your street and then just kind of put this standard drawing in your plans, and let's assume, and not hope, but assume that we can make all the grades work. What we're saying now is we need our engineers, when they're designing these projects, to actually go through the work and make sure that that design will work in the field. Because the contractors are going to need more information also. It's unrealistic to expect our contractors to have to build these technical criteria without giving them the proper information. Another part of the engineering design standards are protruding objects. Hopefully that should be fairly self-explanatory. The picture on the right there, that kind of, if you see there's signs, fire hydrants, again, a person with disability or visual impairment, they're trying to navigate this corridor, left, right. We're on the left, we want to move toward, hey, try and create this nice corridor for your pedestrians to move down. And whether it's just a nicer way to design a street, whether you have a disability or not. No, excuse me. The changes we're proposing to Chapter 96, to the sidewalk ordinance, which again has first reading tonight. One, we're clarifying our specifications and supervision requirements, which is in 96051. I'll call it the majority of the, if you want to say the meaty changes are in 96052 and 053, where we're clarifying the permit, approval, and inspection requirements. So a couple things I want to point out there as far as the permit. There was maybe some ambiguity in the ordinances before regarding permits. So if I'm an average homeowner and I need to replace a few panels of sidewalk, ordinance says anybody doing sidewalk or approach work has to get a sidewalk or approach permit. Well, there's probably 200 to 300 of those permits a year. But the vast majority of our sidewalk gets installed under a building permit for a new home. There's about 1,000 new homes built a year. And it was really kind of, again, ambiguous if the sidewalk and approach was covered under that building permit. We clarified it that if you have a building permit, you don't come in and get a separate sidewalk and approach permit. So that's kind of one component of it. And the other one is the inspection requirements. Previously, we had not been doing the inspection on the sidewalks for these 1,000 new homes, and we've actually done some spot checks in the last year, and we found that a lot of the sidewalk cross slopes aren't being installed correctly, which is a violation of the ADA. So we need to make sure that we go out there and inspect every piece of sidewalk that's installed in the public right-of-way. So because of that, one of the requirements in this ordinance is we're requesting that the contractors call us within 2 business days after they install their concrete, so we can go out and install that, rather than us. What we've been trying to do the last 6 months is just trying to, if you want to say, guess when they're installing it. Very inefficient process. So this way, it would be no different than, you know, if you have your building permit, if you're doing mechanical work, plumbing work, you have to call in for an inspection. It's the same process for doing that. Install your work, call the city, we'll come out and inspect it. So implementation, communication, and education strategies. So couple of the big things, working with the HBA on implementation. So working with them, they recommended a spring effective date, and this would apply to new permits taken out after the effective date of the design standards and ordinance, which, again, if with your approval, that would be April 14th is when we would move forward with this. As far as the communication, we've already done several letters throughout last fall and this winter. What we plan on doing is doing another letter email to the contracting community. We have over 900 email addresses, hard mail addresses to get this information out. We also want to, we've actually got a draft educational packet that anybody who comes in, pulls a new building permit, we want to hand them this packet of information. Hey, there's new requirements out here. And then we actually have a training with the HBA scheduled for April 18th. And we're going to be trying to push that information out to the HBA or through the HBA, through their website, they push out different notifications. So I think we got a pretty solid plan as far as trying to educate the contracting community out there. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Shannon? Councilor Kiley?
No questions, but thank you, Shannon. Thank you to you and to everybody else involved on your team for bringing this forward yet really a third time now, because it's been to land use, as Shannon had mentioned, 2 times previously. And he was very good after the first presentation to go back and answer a number of questions that members of the Land Use Committee had. And so you did a great job, and also how this would impact the members of the Home Builders Association as well. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing this afternoon.
Thank you.
Councilor Neisert?
I echo those thanks. I do have a question. I had a citizen actually contact me, and something just kind of popped in my head as you were talking. That their question was, so in a newer subdivision in which they live, you've got this long length of sidewalk heading towards a school, but of course every lot hasn't been built out yet. And usually, you don't require a sidewalk to be built until they develop it. This person's question was, so, and we could take handicapped maybe and fill that in instead of children. That if somebody's going down multiple blocks of street, but now you have an undeveloped parcel, would there be any ADA requirement to put in a sidewalk in that chunk? Let's say a vacant house lot. You've got sidewalk going multiple blocks, and you've got a void where it's just dirt because it hasn't been developed yet. Now somebody has to go in the street. Would there be anything that would force somebody, like a landowner, it's annexed, it's in the city, it's just undeveloped, that they would have to put in a sidewalk prior to constructing a house, for example?
Chad Heavey with the Engineering Division of Public Works. That's one of the things we look at when a school decides or picks a location of where they're going to go is these paths. And I know in the past we have had to go through our process of asking or requiring them to fill in some of those missing parcels. But you're absolutely correct. It's usually the sidewalk is put in when the home is built, and there have been instances where there's been 1 or 2 properties that are missing, and we've worked with that developer or lot owner to get the sidewalk in ahead of the construction of the home.
Okay, I do have a citizen in an existing area that's been built for many years, and there's one on the way to Hayward Elementary on a long stretch of street. And it's been many, many years, but it just hasn't been developed, and they were wondering, is there a way in which somebody could, put in the sidewalk?
If you want to send me the address, we'd be happy to take a look at it. And,
okay, appreciate it.
And usually after we, have a discussion with the property owner, they understand, and usually we'll put it in, so.
Okay, thank you.
So Chad, if I could add to that, if we did have a long stretch of property like that that's undeveloped that we required a sidewalk to go in, would you do the, where you expect the driveways to be, put in a 5-foot passing deal, or would you just put one in every 200 feet?
I think it would depend. I'll give you another example. When Rosa Parks was built out on East 26th Street, there was I wish I had a map, but there's an area of residential homes that at the time were north and west of there, and they didn't have a good path to get to the school. And so we worked with the school district and the owner of the field that we were farming, or not we were farming, but that was being farmed, and we cooperatively installed a blacktop asphalt path through that field. And so it depends on, I mean, in that instance, it worked better for us to put this path through the cornfield, and one of the first things the school district did after the snow is they'd go out and scoop that. So we'd be happy to look at any, but there's probably not any two that are alike. And in that one instance, the asphalt path worked, and for all I know, it may still be out there.
So everything's not black and white. There are gray areas all the time.
That's just one of the challenges that comes with the new school going in. So,
Other questions? Yes, Councilor Selberg.
I think you may have answered this at one point already, but those ramps, how durable are those again? Do they need to be replaced at certain points, and if so, how often? Just depends.
You know, if they get hit by a snowplow or a motor grader, you know, the blade portion, if that goes right up on the corner, they can get broke. You know, we haven't dealt with any, I'll say just where the composite ones, the plastic ones are disintegrating. We haven't had many challenges with that. One of the things I brought up in land use, though, is we are moving toward, on our arterial streets, that we're going to be using cast iron detectable warning plates. Now, generally, those projects are bid by the city and let by the city, so it wouldn't be an additional cost to the builder. So maybe I should back up there. So most of these detectable warning panels, the curb ramps, are installed by home builders in residential developments. That's where the vast majority of them are. There, we're going to keep with the composite ones. But again, where they have more on our arterial streets, that's where you see the snowplows, the blades, they'll actually have to go up on that sidewalk because a lot of times it's back a curb. They got their blade up there, they're driving up there, they're pulling it back. So they just take a lot more abuse on a residential street. The cast iron ones, they're more durable, but they are much more expensive, and they're a lot heavier. I mean, you can about imagine, I mean, these detect warning panels, one person can install it, where the cast iron ones, it takes at least 2 people to move those around.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Counselor?
Yes.
Just
Councilor
one
Carter.
closing. Shannon, thank you very much for your attention to detail. And a lot of this is being directed by ADA requirements, but and with good reason too. For a council member who had a sister with a disability that confined her to a wheelchair, I'm fully aware of the difficulties that she encountered trying to navigate sidewalks throughout our city blocks. Sometimes something as simple as just a small crack could be is the same as a 5-foot barrier or 10-foot barrier to the rest of us, just trying to negotiate the wheels up over that little crack. So that your attention to detail and the regulations and policies that you're putting forth, greatly appreciated by this counselor, and I'm sure by a large number of members of our community with disabilities. So thank you very much.
Okay, moving on then, let's ask Director Cotter to come, or Cotter, come forward, and probably Cooper also, to talk about the Ice and Recreation Center roadway improvements. We don't get to get Cotterized yet? Okay.
Hello again, Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. Mark Cotter and I wanted to give you an update today regarding conversations that we've been having with representatives of the Glory House about their interest in expanding their facility. We've met with them twice, and it's been a really productive sessions. Right now, the Glory House sits on about 1.3 acres of land area, and they've been in that location for a number of years. As we've discussed about the adjoining property that the city owns, the Ice and Recreation Center, that sits on about 2.4 acres of land. As we've sat down and talked to them, the discussion has been, you know, what exactly are your expansion plans? What are your needs for the future? What kind of land area are you looking at? And what are some of the efficiencies that maybe we could help you with as far as developing your proposed plan? And along with that, we've talked about the extension of 49th Street and what that will also do to that area, because with the proposed alignment of the 49th Street corridor, there's going to be about another acre of land, an odd-shaped parcel of land that will be between the southern edge of 49th Street and the northern edge of both the Glory House and the Ice and Rec Center site. So what we want to do is look at the big picture of how all this can come together, the 49th Street extension, what's going to happen to the Ice and Rec Center property, and then what we can do again to help guide the Glory House to meet their long-term needs for additional housing. So as I said, it's been a very productive sessions, and as you can see, we have representatives there in the audience today. But a couple things that have come up that I want to bring Mark up to continue the discussion is a more engineering analysis of the 49th Street extension and what impact that might have as far as stormwater drainage needs, and then also what we have in terms of information to present to you today on the appraisal that we had conducted for the Ice and Rec Center property. So next, I'll bring up Mr. Mark Cotter.
Welcome, Director.
Thank you, Council Chair and Councilors. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Mike and I have had really good discussions with Dave Johnson with the Glory House. He's here tonight, along with Jake Kwasny and Connie Johns with Lloyd Companies. And if they could raise their hand to be recognized. I also want to give them the opportunity to step up here after I just say a few things. Public Works is involved really for two reasons. That we've got the 49th Street extension that's been planned for a number of years to take load and traffic off 41st Street. Recently, when this item came forward, we had mentioned that with some recent design changes that have occurred since we started to design this road several years ago, the storm requirement in an industrial area has increased from a 2-year storm event up to a 5-year event. So we wanted to make sure we update those engineering drawings of the 49th Street extension, see if there's any additional land or facilities we need to accommodate that greater storm event, so we could respond accordingly if any additional lands are needed. Specifically, on the north side of the Ice and Rec Center is a tract of land that was purchased from the Burlington Northern Santa Fe a number of years ago. Okay. And so that design has been completed, and the designs have been updated, and no additional land is required for detention in that area. So I think for purposes of discussion and the options to be discussing, to assemble those two parcels of land, the one that the Ice and Rec Center is on and the Burlington Northern tract of land, those two can be discussed in combined for a higher and better use. Okay, so that should answer the questions really on the design of the 49th Street extension. We have asked the design professionals to continue to move forward on that design, get us the what we call the H-plats, the land that the road would sit on, get those identified so we can hire appraisers, so we can start to have some negotiations with the landowners essentially between West and Grange. We'd like to get those appraisals done, get those negotiations done, get those lands in place so we can get that roadway extended, which our goal is certainly within the next 5 years. Okay. The other reason Public Works is involved is that we have two real estate professionals, both combined have over 40 years of experience. Collectively, with all the roadway, parks, and other departments, land needs throughout the course of a year. An average year, they do about 300 transactions with about $6.5 million in value. So they're very experienced, have a great deal of knowledge on carrying out the respective temporary easements, permanent easements, and land acquisitions that we need to do through and across the city with a growing city. They put on contract 4 appraisers at the start of the year, so as lands need to be appraised, that they can access one of those 4 and get appraisals done. In November of 2016, Community Development did request the Ice and Rec Center to be appraised, and so the appraiser that was selected is Greg Cashmitter. Greg has been in the business for 40 years, probably one of the most respected appraisers in our area, and one that we rely on to do these commercial appraisals. He has come to an opinion of value for the two parcels combined, so the parcel that the Ice and Rec Center is on and the Burlington Northern tract of land, and so collectively that those two lands together are appraised at $675,000. If you equate that to a per square foot cost, it's about $6.18 per square foot. We did ask Greg to develop a letter that we can provide to you and the public that summarizes his findings, so you can have that in writing for that you now have, and we'll also have those at the door for the public to have as well. So that's your update on the 49th Street extension. The appraisal is $675,000 for the combination of those two parcels combined. And we did extend the invitation to Dave Johnson. If he'd like to step forward and say a few words based on the discussions that we've had, I'd offer that to Dave. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Please stand by for questions that we have them. Mr. Johnson?
Good afternoon, Council. Dave Johnson, I'm with the Glory House. We have, as the gentleman have already said, we have been meeting and trying to just figure out how do we get where we want to go. From our agency's perspective, I think you all know our skin in this game is that we've got clients that have needs. We want to provide an expanded level of services, and that would include affordable housing. We continue to want to be good partners with the city, trying to get this done, looking at long-term goals of everybody's, which is, at least in my mind, trying to create taxpayers from those that we have been paying taxes to keep them incarcerated. So we work in good faith. We would like to have that opportunity to continue to provide these services on a long-term basis. One thing I might mention is that everything that we put into it, depending on if we would have to pay for some property, have to be built back onto whatever clients use those services, because we don't have investors. We have a nonprofit. So there's a pretty tight budget on everything. So I would just say that, though, I appreciate the opportunity to work with the city administration. We're just trying to figure out a way to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the council? Ladies first. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Mark, Mr. Cotter, could I please ask you a couple questions? I'm just reading through the letter that we just received. My question is between the $355,000 and the $675,000 differences, because, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm reading it as if today, if we were to sell that building, because it needs so much work, it's had some issues, it would be $355,000. But if all the work and upgrades and everything, substantially that property could be way more, meaning $675,000. So I'm a little bit confused between the two numbers. Help me understand that.
Yeah, they originally looked at it and said, if you were going to probably occupy this for any other use, you're probably looking at a minimum investment of $355,000. Right now, if you walk in there, there's a gravel floor, because that's what they flood and freeze for ice. There's relatively low sidewalls. There's rust, and so that's been noted in the appraisal just to basically show that if you're going to go ahead and utilize that at any extent, you're probably looking at a minimum remodel cost of about $355,000. So then they just took a step back and said, likely if that's not going to occur, what's the as-is today to go and buy that piece of property and likely assume that it be raised and just use the land for a complete redevelopment, and that's the $675,000 value. So I know that the way he wrote that
Okay, I
is
misunderstood
a little
it.
confusing. But I think it was, in his opinion, I think it was important for him to note that if you don't go in this building, if you go into it right now, the parking lot is shot.
Right.
The inside of the building doesn't have a concrete floor. It's not your typical drive-by, and that's a warehouse that's ready to move into. There's some absolute remodeling costs that would be needed, that if any other use besides skating, you'd have to make that investment. So I would tell you to just go with the $675,000.
If I may have a follow-up, please, does the 675 include any additional work? I know it says as is, but I mean, obviously, no one's going to start an ice rink there, or, I mean, they could if they purchased it for that. I guess you could do whatever you want with it if you buy it, but really the intent, if I was a betting person, it would not be an ice rink as it is right now. It's just storage.
Right.
So we're using this building for $675,000 worth of storage for that building, really.
That's right.
We're doing right now.
That's fair. And I think what was important to us is that we said if there's an opportunity to subdivide, because I think that's what Dave and the Lloyd team are really working on, is what is the extent of the lands that would be ideal for their expansion. We've talked about it. We've raised several houses last year. The Public Works team has taken down those buildings. That would be another in-kind factor that the city could do. And so to sort of get past, is there going to be costs if this were to be raised and then subdivided? Those are resources that the city has that can assist.
Gotcha. And then, so that little triangle piece behind it, has that been appraised as well, or is that included in the value?
That hasn't been appraised. In fact, that's owned by KNUB.
Right. We don't own it yet.
That's the tank farm. And what we shared with our designers is that, if they were able to get an access, and this is the conversation we had with Dave and his team the other day, if they were able to get an access, there's still a fair amount of property that comes in that triangle. They could technically get an access probably off West. We wouldn't give them an access off 49th Street. But if they got an access off West, they could develop that. We haven't had a conversation with KNUB to see if they are going to require it as a condition of the sale of the city buying the roadway right away, if they're going to require us to buy that. Just with softening sales tax, we wouldn't be going in normally saying we want to buy the road right away and this large remnant property. But the commitment we made to Dave is once we start that negotiation, we'll get them in the room so that KNUB knows that there's a willing buyer that could potentially put the whole transaction together.
Right. Well, thank you for providing this, and I'm certainly not questioning the work of the professionals. I just was trying to understand the value of it and where it was coming from. Is this report accessible for us to be able to see the full report? I know this is a summary, but if we wanted to see that report, is that an option, or how does that work?
Well, typically in negotiations, we don't release appraisals. I mean, I would certainly think if you wanted to come in and view it, but it's not typically in the best interest of the city until we know to not only protect the buyer, the seller, and the appraiser, that we did ask Greg, provide us on your letterhead your opinion of value, 675. He went through the normal process. The appraisal was about $4,700 to get. That's what a typical commercial appraisal goes for. And so I think at this point we're looking at, all the respective comps are in the appraisal. The two key numbers are 675 total assemblage, or about 618 per square foot.
Right. Perfect. Okay. Thank you for the information. I really appreciate your work.
You're welcome.
Councilor Neisert.
So I'm looking right now at the plat map. I'm looking with the parcel finder. Okay. And so I just want to be really clear what we're talking about. So there's the parcel that the Ice and Rec Center's on, which looks like it's lot 3 of block whatever in Western Valley Edition. And then behind it, there's this square, or this rectangle that's 100 feet deep. That's right. Also owned by the city of Sioux Falls.
That's right. We purchased that from the Burlington Northern several years ago. That land's generally, Counselor, started at about west and went east went past Lincoln High School and tied into 26th Street.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Mr. David, would you be able to pull that up on the computer so we could all see it?
Sure.
Do you want to just take Jim, or do
Let
you
me
want to just take
have,
Greg's
let
phone?
me grab.
Give you my phone, I guess, but
That might be easier. He's got a picture of it right there. That'll do it.
That piece. right
perfect.
there.
That's what I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
You've got it there. TR3.
Yeah, so TR3 was purchased, the cost basis on that was about $46,000. And then, as I understood it, the Ice and Rec Center was purchased in that 2000 timeframe. There was an agreement for 5 payments of $20,000, so the cost basis of that is $100,000.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, so is this appraisal covering just this, the 3 below, or also track 3 all wrapped into one piece? If it was, what
All
is it
wrapped
covering?
into one, because
Into one.
it is. Mm-hmm.
Because you stated earlier that you don't need this piece for storm drainage, you could.
That's right. Yeah. And so essentially the appraisal would look at track 3 as being approximately $60,000 in value, and the property that the Ice and Rec Center is on is $615,000. So the assemblage is $675,000.
670. And the alignment of a future street would be north of this old railroad alignment? Is that the
Yes,
idea?
so
Just
there
north
you
of
go.
there?
We'll see Michael's here. So
Okay.
it doesn't even touch that parcel that's in subject, okay?
Okay.
So it also tells you the size of that triangle property that KNUB Pipeline owns. Yes, right there. And so we haven't started those discussions with KNUB, but if that becomes, say, a condition of the sale, then we would have to have that appraised as well. For the roadway extension, we would start by only appraising the lands that are needed for the 49th Street extension. Okay.
Okay, and just to, again, to be very clear, that you would expect the appraised value would be $675 if I bought it as is, with the expectation that I might raise it and do something else with it.
That's right. That's the opinion of the professional appraiser.
Okay, thank you.
Does this help everybody to understand exactly where it is? Super. More questions? Seeing none, I've got a couple. Director Cooper, if you'd like to, did you want?
I was going to conclude, but I'll wait.
Okay. Come on up, because you're probably going to answer one of the questions that I have.
Okay. I'm Jake Kwasny. I'm with Lloyd Companies. The reason I'm here, among other things that I do there, I oversee our affordable housing program. So I'm working closely with Dave Johnson and the board on this project. And one thing we appreciate the opportunity to work with the city. It's been, very open meetings about how we can find a way to work through this. And I certainly appreciate what Mr. Cashmetter put together here. Well, one thing to take into consideration in the value as we come at it from a multifamily perspective is certainly I think this value reflects a commercial user coming in and using the space. For the sort of multifamily project that, we need to drive rents down so that these users can come in and make the rent payments and support the Glory House, because the Glory House needs to make sure they're collecting rent on these things. That value would be reflected a little bit lower if we were looking at it from a multifamily perspective. And I think that's something that conversations with Mark and Mike, they're open to. So I just want to make sure that's out there.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Selberg.
Mr. Kwasny, while you're there, what kind of value are you thinking when you say lower?
Well, I can tell you when we do a multifamily project, that number's, it's going to be pushing it unless you're looking at a downtown project to be at $3 a foot. But on an affordable housing project, everything we can get goes to lowering the rent. So we usually look at between $200 and $250 because that's what we can get people to sell it to us for. But like I said, every dollar we can save on these projects, we ultimately can rent them for less, because the Glory House doesn't owe a duty to an investor. They just need to be good stewards with their funds so they can make the loan payments.
Thank you.
Along that same line, I'll ask a question. Do you know what the property went for that I believe Costello put up around Costco?
I apologize, I do not have that
Okay,
number.
do either one of you gentlemen have an idea on that? Okay. Thinking that would be a pretty comparable, just, you know, few blocks away, so.
Yep. And generally, you know, we put up a lot of tax credit projects that you're going to be, because that's what we have to pay for them, is $200 to $250 a foot. Now, one thing I'll tell you, on this project, we are trying to not use that program so that the Glory House can truly target the people they're trying to target. When you get into federal funding, there's all sorts of rules about that, and so that is one thing we're trying to avoid. But if we have to, we'll use whatever funding sources we need to make a project work for them. So.
Something that you might be able to answer, or one of you two, and that is, when might we have an idea of what kind of plan would work here for the Glory House and for the expansion of 49th Street? In other words, how do we proceed?
Mr. Cotter and I have met twice, and after today's presentation, our intent is to go back next week and continue to talk about their concept plan, give them some ideas of going east, going north, what those limitations might be. We would like to come together with an idea as soon as possible. The Glory House is working on a pre-application for some funding that they would like to get done by the end of this month of March. So there is a time issue, and I think everybody kind of wants to know what we can agree to or not agree to in terms of how much land area would be needed and how that land could potentially be transferred, under what parameters. So
Good.
we would like to continue meeting with them as quickly as we can after today.
Super. Yes, Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper, I think you just answered my question, but what you're saying is they don't necessarily need the whole plot that we're looking at, where the ice rink is.
That's what we're discussing with them now. Tell us what your long-range plan is. What kind of building square footage would that include, and how much land area would be needed for that? And we've talked about, can we provide some efficiencies by combining with their existing facility? What kind of parking would you need? Those kind of details are still to be worked on. Mm-hmm. But after today, I think we can get into that in a lot more detail.
You know, I guess if I could, Mr. Chair, yes. I'd just like to say to both Mr. Cotter and Mr. Cooper that this is valuable, this kind of conversation, and I know that you guys heard us be a little forthright on this project, and I know that you've heard from the community that this is an important project to a large section of this community. I appreciate you being willing to step up and to have these conversations and to be willing to continue them. This is important to this council, and it's important to the future of Sioux Falls, and so I appreciate both of you for doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Well said. Okay, seeing nothing else on this, thank you all for being here and for giving us this update. Very informative, and keep working on it. Keep working on it. We'll expect something back in 2 weeks or so. No, probably a little longer than that. Mr. Cotter, you're still on board for the third number C on our list here. Number C. Yep, I got to keep you awake. Uh-oh. That is what you call being cotterized right there.
Okay, I did bring this for tonnage. And to tell you that there was two, when we went through a number of changes back in 2007, 8, and 9, a lot of people are involved that guides this whole process on sidewalk assessment, okay? So
That's
I'm not going to
all
read
on-
it for the record.
That's all on sidewalks?
Right. Somebody did ask me if I was going to read it today for the record, and I'm not, so.
Filibusters are not allowed.
And to jump to the end, too, that this was the packet with all the ordinance changes that was handed to the council back. So several changes started in January of 2009, okay? So we've got a presentation, but really want to work off the handouts, and we have the handouts for the public as well. And so let's get started. And so just to frame this discussion up, in the early 2000s, the city of Sioux Falls, before my time, really needed to kind of put forth their first generation of access management standards. Councilor Neitzer and I went through this. The flow charts improved a little bit since then. We had a good conversation to really bring what we believe is a very objective process to sidewalk assessments. If you remember, recently we continued the hearing regarding 69th and Western and Arrowhead Parkway, and I hope that what we take you through today shows you that it's a very objective process. Since then, I will also tell you that we've met with all the property owners, their understanding of the process, and we think that we've answered their questions. They also have copies of this flow chart to make it understandable to them. All right, just to frame up, in 2007, when we were maturing nearly at times almost 1,000 acres of land, there was a large group of the development community, home builders, area bankers, chamber, that came to us and said, we are getting to that size of city that we recognize that development likely should pay more for development. And that's not a common conversation that you would normally hear, but they certainly recognize that the pace and growth of the city was to a point that they knew for us to stay up with them that they were likely going to have to pay more. So we got a group together and really started to just talk through a number of the issues. When some of the first and what I would say sort of low-hanging fruit were ready to be taken forward, we took those forward to City Council to get those put in place. I mentioned that there's two binders of this size. There's a lot of people involved, from the Community Home Builders Association, IRAB committees. It was one of those committees that we met twice a month for 18 months. About 30 people would come to each meeting, and it was really a good idea session. Somebody would take the idea, vet it, come back the next 2 weeks, present it. We'd either take it, we'd take a portion of it or modify it, or we'd table it. Said that that's not really good for Sioux Falls. One of the first things that I thought was very productive is the city of Sioux Falls had to say, we've got to get out of the business of doing some of the funding of development. At the time, if you just visualize a typical square mile and you bisect that at the half-mile points, those are called collector streets. And then if you bisect that, one of those quadrants again of a square mile, that's called a minor collector. Well, at the time, we were participating in, we as a city wanted those streets to be slightly wider. We wanted those pavement sections to be slightly deeper. And so we paid for some of that oversizing. We also paid for, if it was anything greater than an 8-inch water main, we would pay oversizing for them to get those utilities up. Well, we took a step back and said to the development community, before we can find more ways to put more money toward arterial streets, we've got to get out of the business of participating in any of the collector streets. Talked through a number of those situations. They agreed, and we took those changes forward. Now the city of Sioux Falls doesn't participate in any of those collector street costs or oversized utilities that happen inside the city limits. Okay. Then we needed to kind of bring two more big things together. One of them was we needed to kind of take forward the second generation of access management. I think we all understand that we can't create another Minnesota Avenue, we can't create another 41st Street, but we needed to have a good process to get to where we're at today. So when you see a new road, we had a public meeting on 69th Street the other day. when you drive 69th Street, it drives very well because the access has been planned. And as you see new corridors developed, you'll even see that taken to the next step. So access management was key, in some of our transition policies incentivize access, okay? And then we had to figure out if, at the time, if you own property, if you fronted an arterial street, you were assessed an equivalent local street. So visualize what a 5-lane arterial street looks like. That's a Minnesota Avenue, or that's a 41st Street. And then visualize the street that you live on. That's called a local street. Well, if you fronted an arterial street back then, you paid for an equivalent local street because that was your access. And so one of the factors that we said, and that was a lot of assessments and it was a little choppy, we said, well, why don't we find a way to build the access on these arterial streets the right way, and then let's find a way to assess property throughout the entire square mile as opposed to just those people that are on the frontage or right on the arterial street. So a lot more ideas came forward, and what we got to was we got a solid access management plan, and we've got arterial street platting fees. And so on the back of that first sheet that you have is the schedule of all the platting fees, and those platting fees have now been evaluated, and they've been raised and put in place until 2021. And for example, if you have commercial property that you're going to come in and plat this year, you'll pay a platting fee of just over $17,000 an acre. Regardless of where you're at in a given square mile, you don't no longer just have to be at the corner of, say, an arterial street. So I know a lot of that is in depth, but I just wanted to basically be able to frame up that a lot of items were discussed to get us to our objective process. And know that anytime, one of the things we all learned is that anytime you put a new policy in place, that's easy to carry out going forward. It's very similar to what Shannon Verhey talked about today. It's that look back and it's that transitional properties that you've really got to think through some good transition steps. And so that's what we have today. That's what makes our process objective. So if you go back to this flow chart, let's just walk through the different scenarios so I can explain it. And then we can go to some very specific examples so you can see. Okay, so we'll thank Darla Cottrell and Kathy Rustick, as well as the links between the boxes. They're sidewalks as well, to make some additional clarity on this flow chart. So the local and the collector streets that are on the right and the left, if you just come down one box, it just says, if you live or own property on a local or collector street, you are responsible for those streets and ultimately those sidewalks, okay? If you're on an arterial street, that's where the different gates you have to go through, whether you're in the previous policy or if you're in the look forward policy. So the first step, what we look for is the land platted? If the land's not platted, so if you say no, then that's okay. You're going to pay arterial street platting fees, water distribution platting fees, and the other platting fees when you want to plat that property, okay? If you say yes, the land is platted, and you'll see some of these properties that are on 69th and Western and Arrowhead Parkway, a lot of these areas have been platted prior to 2009. And so you'll start to see them fall into this bucket. So if the land is platted, then we ask the question, was it platted after 2009? That's after the new policies went into place. And if the answer is yes, then we already know that that parcel's paid platting fees, and we don't have to worry about a sidewalk assessment. If the land wasn't platted after 2009, then we look back, and this is where we incentivized parcels to do access management, and that'll be It'll be easier to go through some scenarios with you, but I'll at least follow through on the flow chart, and then we'll get to a couple examples. So if the answer is no, then we say, do you have direct access to an arterial street? And so then if you have no direct access to an arterial street, say, one of the examples that you're going to see is out on Arrowhead Parkway. That Arrowhead Parkway, as it generally goes east to west and starts to fall off a little south, there's a road to the north. It's called 10th Street. Well, you may own property on Arrowhead Parkway, but you have the opportunity to go to 10th Street. So if the question is, do you have direct access to the arterial street? If you're no, then you don't pay any sidewalk assessments because we've incentivized access management through this transition policy. And that is in ordinance. If the answer is yes, do you have access onto the arterial street basically directly? Then we ask, is it at the quarter-mile points? Those are what we consider the engineering design standard or avoidance of sidewalk assessments. If you are accessing the arterial street at a quarter-mile connection point, then there's no arterial street sidewalk assessments. If you're in some of these situations, like we'll go through at 69th and Western, where the property owners know that they don't access at the quarter mile, but they know based on either their future development plans or they've ran a calculation to say, would I rather pay sidewalk assessments at probably a conservative value of $40 a running foot to have access, because my type of business, I may need those eyeballs as they're coming by and I want them to drive in. I may be willing to pay that value for direct access, okay? And so that's the objective process, and we've taken each of the property owners through. Let's look at a couple situations to kind of make this more real. Okay, one of your handouts is 69th and Western. And so on 69th Street, if you look where the blue stars are, and they're a quarter mile back at each of those locations, so that's at Prairie Drive to the left and Heather Ridge to the right. Those are what we call, on your flow chart in that green, is it at the standard quarter mile approved access? Okay, so if a parcel actually accesses either Prairie Drive or Heather Ridge, then they would not have sidewalk assessments, okay? But now let's look at the subject parcels. So the one right at the corner of 69th and Western in the southwest corner, kind of a triangular shaped property, that property has access at South Pinnacle Place. It's not at the quarter mile access. So on 69th Street, they're required to pay sidewalk assessments. Okay? And then on Western Avenue, they've worked together with the property owner to the south. That's labeled number 3. That's what that yellow hatched area is. That's called mutual access. They'll have access through and across their property down to that red dot. That red dot is where they're going to have their access. That again is not a blue star. That's not at a quarter mile. And so that requires them to pay sidewalk assessments. All these properties out here, remember back when we said in the old transition they paid for an equivalent local street? They did that, and they've paid their sidewalk, they've paid their assessments off with the exception of sidewalk. 69th and Western Avenues, they were built 2 different years in a row, like 2000 and 2001. And so they were on the old system. They had to pay the equivalent of a local street, and they've paid those assessments off. The one thing that we held back on is with the lack of development that time, we didn't put the sidewalk in. Okay, then the next one is Spirit of Joy Church. They have the ability to access La Quinta on Southwestern. If they only chose that location to access, they would avoid sidewalk assessments. Okay? But they've worked with their engineer and their building committee, and they want an access that still works traffic-wise, but they want an access where that red star and yellow box are. They've said the people to the north can have mutual access through their property, and that they will generally line up across the street with that other red access. And so they're prepared, they understand the rules, and they are prepared to pay that sidewalk assessment to have direct access onto an arterial street. Okay? So it just becomes this objective process that you have to go through to see if they pay sidewalk assessments or not. Now remember, it's because all these parcels out here have been platted. So if you go back to your flow chart, you go back up to the arterial street. Let's just use Spirit of Joy, for example. Go back to the flow chart, and it says, is the land platted? The land is platted. And so then you go over to the yes, and then it says, was the property platted after January 1, 2009? No, because it was platted before. Do they have direct access to an arterial street? That answer would be yes. Then the trigger is it at the approved quarter mile? And the answer is no, because they do have access at La Quinta, but they've also asked for and justified through a traffic report that they can also have one at the intersection of that next property to the north. And so they're fully aware. We've, again, met with all these property owners, and they understand the process. Same thing that happened with the new bank that went in on the southeast corner. When they were building, they wanted to build sidewalk, and we said we're coming in with a brand new large intersection at 69th and Western. Just wait, let us build it, and then we'll have you pay us for that sidewalk assessment. We'll get a good price. This is a big project. It's nearly a $10 million project. They will get the economy of scale. They'll get a large commercial contractor. They'll get a very good price. We expect the $40 estimate is low. But again, when you're a property owner and you have the ability to run that calculation that if I have 100 feet at $40 a foot, am I willing to pay $4,000 to do the sidewalk assessment in exchange for direct access or not? And it's they have that choice. Okay, so let's look at a couple situations on Arrowhead Parkway, and then we'll move on because I know you're getting extended with time. So to frame up this Arrowhead Parkway, look at where the blue circles are. The blue circles are essentially the engineered approved locations at the quarter mile access points. So then we go through this same flow chart with every one of those respective property owners and have that conversation. For example, Jeff DeYoung that's owns those two parcels that are just north of Arrowhead Parkway text, and there's some public right-of-way that splits his two parcels. It would be the third red dot from the left. Okay, so Jeff has the option on that one. The night we had the hearing, we said he has a number of options to consider. He could ask for that road to be vacated. He could come to the city council and ask to be vacated, and then he would go through these steps, and it would be, was the property platted before, after January 1? No, it was platted before. Do you have direct access? If he wants to maintain direct access onto Arrowhead Parkway, since this is not at a blue circle, if you will, then he has to pay sidewalk assessments. If he wants to close that and access 10th Street to the north, he has no direct access. He can avoid sidewalk assessments. And the same thing would be true for the businesses that are back to the left, is they can do that calculation as a business owner. Certain businesses, it is all about eyeballs. And they want to be able to see if somebody's eyeballs drive by and you want them to turn in, they're going to make that calculation if they should do that or not. We knew that when we went through this whole process, we had to have a fair transition. This was the transition. You'll see, too, that there's some black boxes. Those are ones that are working with those property owners to close. Those would be our desired access points to close. We've not reached consensus on all of those. But, you know, we continue to have those conversations. So I hope, I won't take you through every single one. I know we have the continued hearing next week. I think what we're trying to convey is that the front part is the objective process. The back side is the respective city ordinances and state law and the schedule of arterial street platting fees. And if you have any questions, I know that this is a deep dive before next Tuesday night when we bring back both of those sidewalk resolutions of necessity. We'd be more than happy to sit down with you.
I want to thank you for making this in large print for us older people.
You're welcome.
Are there questions? Councilor Staley, ladies first again.
Well, first of all, I wanted to herald back to 2009. What was the rate of sales tax increase that we voted on, or the council voted? What was that, like 0.5%?
0.08.
Remember that was going to go into a pot with the developers' platting fees?
Yeah, so it was essentially rounding it off. So at the time,
2%.
Today we have 2%. At the time we had 1.92. So it was rounding it off another 0.08.
So is that why we've got the 2009 where you're asking if it was platted before that, because now we've got that fund helping with this?
Yeah, and that was one of the factors that came out, was rounding off second penny sales tax so we can put more dollars toward arterial streets. But in many cases, Counselor, that also goes to mature parts of the city, so it's not, in most cases, those dollars don't go to turn a gravel road over to an urbanized road. The majority of our roads that we've improved over the last several years have been arterial streets inside the city. Louise Avenue this year will be one, where we're going from a 4-lane facility to a 6-lane. That expansion allows us to use platting fees because we're expanding the arterial street system, and those dollars from rounding off second penny sales tax. But that has essentially netted out an additional $4 million a year that this city takes advantage of to invest back into their roads.
So that, yeah, because I was involved with that. We did actually start a petition drive at the time.
Okay.
To address that, and it was supposed to be a half and half thing with developers and that sales tax coming together, correct?
There was estimates. It was never a 50-50. It was all based on maturity. And one of the things we've seen, which I think has made us a more sustainable community, is, and you and I had a conversation yesterday about snow gates in some of these very dense areas. The platting fees in general have drove developers to put more on a square foot of land, which means that you're going more vertical than out. And so that, from an infrastructure standpoint, makes us more sustainable. And so there's been a number of things that have occurred since then, but those initial estimates were as if we were going to continue to mature almost 1,000 acres a year, and we haven't. But the good part is we've gone more vertical. Obviously, you're still seeing year after year records break of the amount of investment that developers are putting into the community, and they're just doing it on less land.
Okay, so my concern, though, is that because after 2009, we're having a benefit of that small sales tax increase for those people, and they are not going to have sidewalk assessments, right? When we go down over here, platting fees have been paid after 2009, no assessments. If it was before that, then there is an assessment. So I'm thinking, well, we're using sales tax money to help those situations after 2009. Those people beforehand are the ones who are having to pay more now.
I would actually say the commercial properties that were platted prior to 2009, it's much less cost to develop than it is going forward. I mean, just look at a 1 acre of commercial land, which is approximately 207 by 207 feet. Okay, they will pay about $17,000 an acre. Just for that one platting fee, and then the other ones trigger as well, the water distribution fee, the RDC, the DSCR, what have you. If you are on, if you had 200 feet in the old previous, then the conservative number is $200 times 40 is 8,000. And so it's, in many cases, it's less through that transition. But every situation's different, and so I would just say broadly, as we move forward, the new platting fees, we certainly recognize has put more cost on development. And land that was previously platted prior to June of 2009, prior to January of 2009, they don't have any of those platting fees because they're not platting. And so then they don't trigger those fees, if that makes sense.
Then the second thing, we're having this discussion now because I was concerned about people being notified about these assessments coming up. And apparently you just stated that you've talked with them. Do some people express concern about the cost of this? And if so, how do we help them with that? It kind of is related in a way to the annexation issue.
Sure. I would say that everyone that we've met with certainly understands that there's an objective process and that they, in many cases, have decisions to make regarding the flow chart. Okay? I would say the one thing that council always has the ability to do is that when we were taking through some of the annexation procedures through the assistance of the finance department, is that you moved your time frames from 5 years out now to a maximum of 20. So when we, for example, when we get done constructing everything at 69th and Western, and we come back to you with, here's the assessment, it will likely be less than $40 a running foot. Then we can have that discussion with the property owners that some of them are going to pay us right away. And then the others may ask for an assessment, whether that's 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. That would be your ability to soften that impact on those property owners.
That, as a council, you mean we can help with the terms of that to say 0% interest or?
Well, the interests are guided by ordinance today, and you'd have to work with Tracy Turback with the finance department on that. But you do have the ability to help set the term. And I would say today, there's a maximum term in ordinance of up to 20 years. And based on talking to, say, a handful of property owners on maybe it's different for one project over another, but you may come to terms that one property owner says it would really be helpful if you did a 7-year assessment as opposed to a 5, and we can certainly bring those recommendations forward and then have you act on those. So that's I'd say the interest rate's already very low, and then the second thing you can really assist with is the term.
I believe that is the prime bond rate or something like that that is set. So we don't set it. It's what the market is at that point. I think we do 1% over or 0.5% over to cover the cost of administration on those kind of things.
Yeah, there's a staged approach in ordinance based on the term.
Right.
Based on the length of the term.
Looks like you have it right there.
I do, and I can send this out to you. That's a lot of text.
Why don't you read it real quick so it's in the record?
Okay.
You need some glasses?
No, that's fine. Okay, so thank you, Chad. So the interest rate on assessments that are to be paid over 5 years or less shall be based on the yield published in the Federal Reserve Bank for the 5-year constant maturity of the U.S. Treasury security plus 2%. Okay, so that's a 5-year assessment. The interest rate on assessments that are paid over a period of more than 5 and up to 15 shall be based on a yield published in the Federal Reserve Bank for a 10-year constant maturity of U.S. Treasury security plus 2%. And then the third potential trigger is the interest rate on assessments that are to be paid over a period of more than 15 years and up to 20 shall be based on a yield published in the Federal Reserve Bank for a 20-year constant maturity, Treasury plus 2%. So essentially it gauges you based on the term, and then it gauges you based on a 5-year constant maturity, a 10-year constant maturity, or a 20-year constant maturity U.S. Treasury, so.
Go ahead.
So is this a different set of standards than we have for annexations? When we talk about assess, so that this is the same, when we're moving forward with that, we're going to be dealing with the same set interest?
That's exactly right. So when Tracy brought this amendment forward, it was for any time something was assessed.
But I
Whether the
thought they were
sidewalk-
having discussions about I thought that like Prairie Meadows was having discussions about what that interest rate was going to be. I thought there was some negotiational room there.
I think it was, excuse me, I think it was, they probably asked, what is the 20-year constant maturity plus 2% to understand if that was 4.5, whether that was 5 at the time, is what I would expect. But this is definitely a tool for the annexation task force.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And that used to be, as I remember, set at like 8 or 9% or something like that. It was too high. And we brought that back down to be more realistic and to float with what the actual interest rate.
That's right. I believe there's changes on both sides made.
Right.
Yep.
Councilor Neitzer.
So before I say what I was going to say, I'll just say that that is set in ordinance. So as far as the task force goes, I mean, that may come up. I mean, we can always revisit it. It's an ordinance, so it could be changed.
Right.
I didn't have a question. I was just going to say our meeting was wonderful, and this was really great. I know the big thing for me was there was a lot of confusion with citizens, and I couldn't answer their questions because I frankly didn't understand how the process worked, and now I do, and this will be another nerdy little thing for me to hang on my wall in my office because I can go back to this, you know, when these come up, and I can remind myself how it works. It's about having an objective standard, and here it is. And the only other thing is, are these little sidewalk things, are they 4 feet or 5 feet?
Yeah. Say 5.
Just want to make sure it's accessible. So, thank you.
Love the detail.
Questions over here? I thank you very much. This will be,
You're welcome.
and not to put any pressure on anybody, but this will be the kind of thing I'd like to see with the annexation deal come back to. I mean, wouldn't that be nice if we had this kind of thing, a flow chart like this? So,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you very much. If there are no other questions, we will let you depart. Thank you
very much.
very, very much. Good job. Okay. Is there anything else from the council? Then I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all.